All right, good morning, good morning. It's 2:24 a.m. What's today's date? Today is April 9th, 2020. Day 75 of a pandemic. So I'm gonna share with you, and I hope I can do this justice. I'm gonna share with you what I believe was a revelation from God this morning, and it stemmed from a book that I'm listening to called Wild at Heart. And it's telling the story of how we, at different levels of life, we live in this false sense of self. And so let me give you the degrees of false sense of self, and then you might be able to identify and fall into one of those categories, but they'll be very broad. They won't be narrow. They'll be very broad, because I think if I identify these false sense of self identities, then you'll say, oh, I get that. And one of the false sense of identities could be, I'm not worthy of being rich. I'm not worthy of having money. That's a false sense of self. Another false sense of self is, being wealthy is not for me, right? That's for them. That's for them other people. Or a false sense of self is, I got a great job. My house is paid off. I run a great business. My body looks good, right? And you put so much emphasis on it. That's your sense of self. That's who you believe. That's who you believe yourself to be, right? Now you notice having a false sense of self isn't just one varying degree. We have false sense of selves at different levels. But what was brought to my attention, and this is what I believe was a download, was given to me spiritually, is that without God in your life, it just kind of filled me on this one, because it took me a second to really grasp it. Without God in your life, how do you know that you're actually living at your ultimate best? I mean, on the surface level, everything that a man could want, you have on a surface level. That means what I can see, what you feel, everybody's in alignment, everything's all good. But what about if you had God? And God wants you to have the world. What if you're like a Michael Jordan and you have the world, right? You can go anywhere in the world, everybody knows you. And you say, well, I never heard Michael Jordan talk about God. Never seen him up in church. But what if on Michael Jordan's level, God wanted him to bring more people to Christ? Right? What if your false sense of self is only a fraction of what you could be if more of your life was dedicated to God? Now you're like, why God? Because I ain't ever met a man who could shut a planet down. He's showing you his strength right now. I never met a man who could shut a planet down. Yeah, you got recognition. Yeah, you can go anywhere in the world and they'll know you. But you can't shut a world down. Just what if? What if you had that ability? What if you were living in your false self? Your false self-image? I'm always reminded, and there's like always different little things. Like I'm a legitimate studier. I'm legitimately talented. Let's put it like that. I don't have to do a whole lot mentally to pick up on what the story or what the storyline is. You know, I don't have to I don't need to get hit in the head with a bolt of lightning in order to figure something out. I can figure things out fairly quick. And I remember listening to all of Jim Rohn's stuff. I mean, all of it. If it popped up, I listened to it. I heard it. And I remember listening to all of Les Brown's. Like, these are the people that I was listening to and still listen to as I was going through my journey, because I was looking for confirmation. I was like, show me somebody who can contradict what the other person is saying, because if you find contradiction, then you know that there's the truth isn't there. And I went even back to Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, and I started listening to these guys. And at the beginning of their careers, Tony Robbins too, I don't know if I said that, they were interested, and if you go back and listen, you'll hear it. They were interested in getting the attention of man, because ultimately, what were they doing? They were trying to sell something. They were trying to sell something. They were trying to sell something based on the truth, but they were trying to sell something to everybody. So in order to sell everybody something, they wanted to be very careful not to offend nobody, because the Buddhists call God something else. The Hindus call God something else. The Muslims call God something else. The Christians call God something else. Everybody has a different name for God. Even though they all mean the same thing, everybody has a different name for God. And if you say it in the wrong way, you will offend that class of people. So every single one of those men that I mentioned will call God by the universal language that was acceptable politically. They call him the universe. Oh, when the universe is talking. You need to do this. And when the universe is talking, you need to do that. If you fast forward, even Napoleon Hill, if you fast forward, he has a book out called Outwitting the Devil. All books that you should read. All books that you should definitely read. None of these guys actually matured in their careers. I mean, really hit a home run until they start acknowledging God. Every one of them. Tony Robbins, you'll never hear him call him the universe. Calls him God. Towards the end of Earl Nightingale, Napoleon Hill, towards the end of their lives, in their books, their audio tapes, you'll hear them no longer acknowledge him as the universe, acknowledge him as God. So just imagine, on a surface level, you're living the very best life. I mean, you're doing things that other people really can't do. I mean, you're at an upper echelon where you're part of the 1%. And in your mind, you're saying, I made it, or I'm going, or I'll get there. But just imagine that that's your ego confirming your false sense of self. And you'll never, ever, ever arrive until you give God his grandeur. Until you give him his just due. You will never arrive. And the reason I can confirm that is because in 2006, when everybody else was suffering, I was thriving. And never understanding what was going on at that time in the world, I never took from anybody, and I always kept my word. And I paid my tithes, even if I didn't show up to church.